A prejudiced woman suddenly splashes her drink on a waiter of another race. She is taken aback when the waiter decides to get even. The pleasant clinking of glasses and the gentle hum of chatter filled the restaurant as Ethan Collins adjusted his tie in the staff area, taking a deep, calming breath. The vibrant crowd tonight felt even more energetic than usual, and he sensed the weight of many curious eyes observing his every action. Tonight would follow the same pattern as always. He had the routine down perfectly. Serve with a grin, stay composed, and keep moving. As he approached the table in the corner, his customary polished smile faltered just a bit. There was a woman he'd been alerted about. Brosa Hastings was a familiar face, a powerful executive in her early 40s. Impeccably dressed and focused on her phone with visible impatience, she didn't look up when he got closer, as if he wasn't even there. "Good evening, ma'am," Ethan greeted, maintaining his smooth tone. "Can I start you off with some sparkling or still water?" Brosa barely glanced in his direction, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh that seemed meant for everyone around. "Sparkling, I guess. And make it quick. My time is precious," she said. Ethan felt his jaw tighten just a little, but he kept his face neutral. He had faced worse before. Nodding politely, he headed to the bar behind him, catching a whisper from Brosa's table. Her voice was low, but unmistakably pointed. "I can't believe they've got someone like him working here. This place used to have standards." The comment struck harder than Ethan wanted to admit. He tightened his grip on the water bottle momentarily before taking another deep breath to steady himself. It wasn't the first time he had encountered people like Brosa. He recognized the type. Those who believed his position said something about his character and value. When he returned to her table with the bottle, Brosa was still glued to her phone. "Here's your water, ma'am," he said evenly, pouring it with care. Her gaze finally lifted, examining him like he was an unwelcome bug that had landed on her table. "You're new, aren't you?" Her tone was dismissive, each word a little jab. Ethan set the bottle down gently. "I've actually been here for a while," he replied, a subtle bite to his voice. She raised an eyebrow, a smirk creeping onto her lips. "Huh, really? Doesn't show. I just assumed, Her eyes scanned him up and down before returning to her phone. There it was. Ethan felt a quick, fiery urge to say something, anything, to remind her he was just as human as she was, but years of experience had taught him patience. He knew better than to waste words on someone who wouldn't listen. "I'll be back shortly to take your order, ma'am," he said instead, his voice calm and steady. As he weaved between tables, Ethan attempted to brush off the encounter, but Brosa's remark stuck with him, a reminder that for some, his dedication to his work might not hold much value. And there she was, seated in one of the city's top dining spots, as if it all was meant for her. For the time being, he decided to stay professional. He would keep serving with a friendly smile, just as he had done every day before. But he couldn't shake the thought that someday individuals like Brosa might receive a little wake-up call that not everything in life could be dictated by their privilege. Ethan continued his rounds, maintaining his focus as he moved from table to table, trying to put his encounter with Brosa behind him as much as possible. Each polite exchange and each genuine smile from other guests reminded him of why he cherished his job, even in challenging moments like these. But as he neared Brosa's table again, he felt a twinge of discomfort. Brosa sat there with her arms crossed, her gaze sharp and impatient as she watched him approach. "It's about time," she remarked, her voice tinged with annoyance. "I've been here waiting for a simple drink. An order like this place has all day. Apologies for the delay, ma'am." Ethan responded calmly, placing the glass in front of her. He kept his demeanor composed and steady. "Is there anything else I can get for you at the moment?" She picked up the glass and gave him a long, scrutinizing look before taking a slow sip. Setting the glass down, she leaned back, her gaze piercing. "I don't mean to be rude," she began, although her tone suggested otherwise. "But I can't help but notice how the standards here seem to have changed lately. You know, Back in the day, this restaurant wouldn't have needed a diversity quota to fill its staff. Ethan's expression remained unchanged, but he felt the sting of her words. Sharp and pointed. Ma'am, I assure you everyone here is employed based on their qualifications. Is that so? She smirked, as if finding it amusing. Look, I'm just saying it's clear what they're doing in a place like this, trying to show that they're inclusive. She let out a little scoff while waving her hand. But I guess that's just the way things are these days. We need to create room, even if it means the quality isn't quite as high. Ethan clenched his hands behind him, feeling the tension rise as he struggled to keep his expression calm. I'm here to ensure your experience is as delightful as possible. Ma'am, if there's anything particular you'd like, I'd be more than happy to assist. Brosa's eyes narrowed, almost challenging him to falter. Absolutely, I'll have the seared salmon. And please ensure it's made to the restaurant's usual excellence. Her emphasis on usual was a thinly veiled jab, her gaze still locked on him with the same scrutinizing judgment she'd worn since he first approached her. Certainly, ma'am. I'll take care of it. Ethan nodded, turning to head back to the kitchen. Yet, as he walked away, her voice followed him loud enough to catch the attention of those nearby. It's truly unfortunate how standards have fallen, but I guess these days we need to ensure everyone feels at home. Regardless of what he felt, the weight of her words pressed down, each one a deliberate jab meant to belittle him. He held his head high as he passed other tables, suppressing the frustration bubbling within him. He had encountered this kind of bias before, and he knew how to cope with it. But tonight, the feeling of unfairness lingered from her words, leaving a bitter taste. Returning to the kitchen, he communicated the order to the chef with a steady voice, but the anger simmered just beneath his calm surface. Each of her pointed remarks hit deeper than the last. Ethan's patience was as thin as a thread as he moved between tables, his usual calm battered by the unrelenting tide of insults from Brosa's table. Every sharp word, every disdainful glance, and especially her insinuation about him being a diversity hire burned in his mind, each one a barb that cut deeper. He was accustomed to rude patrons, but her audacious disrespect made this evening unlike any other across the room. He saw her raise her hand again, waving him over with an exaggerated gesture and tapping her empty glass on the table as if to further embarrass him. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached, forcing his tone to remain friendly. Even ma'am, would you like another drink? He inquired. His voice was steady, though a bit sharp. Brosa didn't reply right away, just surveyed him with that cocky, disdainful grin. Well, it seems you finally decided to make an appearance. She mocked, and I was beginning to think that customer service was not important to you folks. Ethan felt a spark of irritation, but he made sure to nod. I'm sorry for the delay, he answered. Briefly, I'll fetch your drink immediately. Oh, I'm sure you will, she replied, her voice loud enough for everyone around to catch. They probably keep you around just to show they're diverse. After all, they wouldn't want to seem unfair. Ethan felt his patience wearing thin, the heat of anger rising inside him. He straightened up, meeting her glare head-on. Ma'am, I've earned my spot here, just like anyone else. Brosa let out a sharp, cold laugh that cut through the air. Let's not fool ourselves. You're just a token. They needed someone to meet a quota, and you happen to fit the bill. Be thankful they even allow you in here. He stepped a little closer, his voice firm but respectful. Respect goes both ways, ma'am. If you want it, maybe try showing some first. Brosa's face twisted with rage, and before he could react, she snatched her glass and tossed the remaining water right at him. The chilly liquid drenched his face and shirt, instantly soaking him. Gasps filled the room as the other guests turned to witness the spectacle, their expressions a mix of shock and quiet disapproval. For a moment, Ethan stood there, wet, his eyes fixated on Brosa's self-satisfied, victorious look, but instead of shrinking back, he felt his anger overflow, no longer manageable. Oh, don't worry, ma'am, he said with a hint of sarcasm. I'll get you that refill. Maybe I'll even hurry a bit, since I wouldn't want to take up any more of your valuable time." Her mouth fell open in disbelief, but she quickly regained her poise, her face twisting in fury. "Excuse me, who do you think you're talking to? Someone who believes they deserve respect without giving any." He shot back, his tone resolute. "Someone who thinks money gives them the right to treat others poorly." Brosa's face flushed red, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that? You're just an arrogant little server who doesn't understand who he's up against." "Oh, I know exactly who I'm up against," Ethan replied coolly, "and I believe everyone here does too." Brosa's eyes blazed as she opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Kames, the restaurant manager, approached with a serious expression, looking back and forth between them. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. His voice was steady, yet carried a clear tone of authority. Brosa quickly turned to him, seizing the opportunity to regain her composure. "Yes, there's an issue. This server was disrespectful, and I insist he be dismissed right away. I refuse to be insulted by someone just filling a role." Kames's gaze shifted from the drenched Ethan to Brosa, whose expression was filled with rage. He took a deep breath, his voice composed but assertive. "Ma'am, we have a firm policy against disrespectful behavior toward our team. I'm going to kindly ask you to leave." Her eyes widened in surprise, her mouth agape in disbelief. "You want me to leave? I am a paying customer." "Yes, ma'am," Kames responded, his tone steady. "This is your final notice. We would be glad to refund your meal, but I need you to exit the restaurant." Brosa shook her head, her anger growing as she crossed her arms. "No," she declared sharply. "I won't be leaving until this man is dismissed. I refuse to be shown the door like some nobody." Kames sighed and gestured to the hostess to call security. "Ma'am, if you choose not to leave, we will have to involve security." Brosa's expression twisted even more, her eyes blazing with fury as she realized her defiance was attracting attention from the nearby tables. "Go ahead and call them," she spat. "Let everyone witness how this place treats its valued customers. I have connections in this city, important connections." Kames simply held his ground, his gaze unwavering. Security arrived shortly, standing politely yet firmly near the entrance, indicating she was not welcome any longer. Realizing she had no other option, Brosa grabbed her coat and bag, her mouth set in a tight, furious line as she prepared to exit. But as she marched toward the door, she turned back one last time, glaring fiercely at Ethan. "This is why people like you don't belong here." She sneered, her voice filled with disdain, lacking respect, no class, just pure entitlement. "You'll always be nothing more than help, no matter where you go." The room fell silent, every patron staring in stunned disbelief. Ethan felt the weight of her words, the negativity and harshness, but he remained strong, unwavering. He held her gaze, his voice calm. "And yet here I am, still here." Brosa let out an exasperated huff, then turned on her heel and marched out the door, which swung shut behind her with a final satisfying bang. The restaurant fell silent. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. A few diners glanced at Ethan, some giving him understanding nods, while others whispered words of encouragement. For the first time that night, he felt a sense of triumph. Whatever control she thought she wielded, it had shattered. The moment she unveiled her true self. Kames placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his look warm. "You did great. I'm sorry you had to experience that." Ethan nodded, his cheeks still wet, but his spirit uplifted thanks to Kames. "I really appreciate it." As he resumed his tasks, he realized that regardless of what came next, he wouldn't allow people like Brosa Hastings to bring him down. The restaurant gradually returned to its typical buzz of soft conversations and clinking glasses after Brosa's dramatic departure, yet the tension remained. Diners occasionally stole glances at Ethan, some nodding in silent approval, others offering kind smiles. It felt as if the entire room had silently come together for him, their quiet support lifting his spirits. As he continued his rounds, Kames pulled him aside, his expression serious yet comforting. "Ethan, I just want to check in on you after everything." Kames gestured vaguely to the door, where Brosa had made her scene. Ethan exhaled deeply, feeling the last of his frustration fade away. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just weary of dealing with people like her." Kames nodded, his expression softening. "She's not the first, and I doubt she'll be the last, but you did well. Stood your ground." Even when she lost her cool, he lowered his voice and added, "Don't stress if she tries to act on her threats. We'll take care of it. You won't be alone in this." "Thank you, Kames," Ethan replied, feeling the burden lift a bit more. "I genuinely appreciate it." They both returned to their respective tasks. But as Ethan continued the rest of his shift, he couldn't shake the memory of Brosa's final spiteful words. Even now, they resonated in his mind, blending with the satisfaction of seeing her forced to leave. He had encountered people like her before, but rarely had someone so openly exhibited their bias and entitlement. As the night came to a close, Ethan couldn't help but ponder if that was truly the last he'd see of Brosa Hastings. Something in her eyes, that unsettling feeling that her power reached far beyond the restaurant's doors, made him uneasy. He had encountered that kind of entitlement before. The belief that money and connections could shield her from the consequences of her behavior. The next day, Ethan's persistent discomfort turned out to be justified. He showed up at the restaurant for his evening shift to see a few of his colleagues, casting him odd looks, some encouraging, others a tad anxious. When he entered the staff area, Kames was there, holding a file in one hand, his expression more serious than usual. "Ethan," Kames said, inviting him to sit down. "It seems we're not completely finished with M. Hastings." Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. "What's going on?" Kames sighed while flipping through the file. "She filed a formal complaint with management alleging you were rude and unprofessional, that you embarrassed her in front of other guests," and he paused, a hint of anger flashing in his eyes, "that you harassed her due to her race." Ethan felt a rush of anger but kept himself composed. "She threw her drink at me. Kames, and everyone witnessed how she treated me, I know. And that's precisely what I explained to management." Kames reassured him. "We have statements from at least 5 guests who saw the incident, all supporting your version of events." Ethan breathed out, feeling a blend of relief and exasperation. But why take it this far? She already made a fool of herself. Why can't she just move on? Kames gave a small, bitter smile. Folks like her aren't accustomed to being told no. She anticipates everyone to cater to her wishes, and when they don't, she retaliates. But don't worry, management is on our side. They understand what kind of person she is. They've dealt with complaints like hers before, empty threats from individuals who believe their status makes them invincible. Ethan's shoulders relaxed a bit, although the anger still bubbled beneath the surface. "Thank you, Kames. I really appreciate it." Kames nodded firmly. "You're one of our top servers, Ethan. We won't let you go over someone like her. This is merely a formality, something we must address. She's not coming back here." With that reassurance, Ethan began his shift, but the encounter with Brosa lingered in his mind. He felt a persistent tension, curious if she would continue her vendetta against him outside the restaurant. A week later, as Ethan was wrapping up his shift, he noticed a familiar figure stroll through the door. Brosa Hastings, looking as arrogant and entitled as she did during their previous confrontation. Her gaze swept across the restaurant before locking on to Ethan, and she marched over, her expression firm and unyielding. "Ethan," she said, her tone thick with sarcasm. "Still around, I see. Clearly, this place has lost all standards." Ethan maintained his calm demeanor, although his jaw clenched. "Ma'am, if you're here to dine, please have a seat. Otherwise, I shall have to request your departure." Brosa emitted a loud and derisive laugh. "You presume to be in a position to ask me to leave," she scoffed. "I am here because I have recently discovered that this establishment had the audacity to ban me, and I intend to inform your manager precisely what I think of that decision. You were requested to vacate the premises due to your treatment of me and others, and there is no necessity to reiterate it. Ethan replied, his tone resolute. You may either adhere to our policies or seek an alternative venue. Brosa advanced closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You believe this establishment values you. The sole reason you remain here is that they desire to appear inclusive while fulfilling their precious diversity quota. You would be cleaning the streets if not for that. Her words were sharp and cutting like a slap. Ethan inhaled deeply, striving to maintain his position. I am here because I excel at my profession, he stated coldly, a concept you shall never grasp. All you comprehend is how to treat individuals as though they are inferior to you. Her smirk broadened, directed at people like you, feigning a sense of belonging. It is always so evident. Regardless of how fervently you endeavor to assimilate, you remain simply, well, yourself. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the sting of her words in his chest. She stood before him, savoring each insult, as if challenging him to reply. He met her stare, resolutely refusing to look away. Oh, do not concern yourself, she continued, her tone laced with mock sympathy. The higher you aspire to ascend, the more arduous your fall shall be. Individuals, such as me, have witnessed it before. All you shall ever be is the help. She scrutinized him, her smile expanding as he absorbed each spiteful remark. However, Ethan was not retreating this time. He had reached his limit. At that moment, Kames appeared beside them, his expression grave as he observed the two. Ms. Hastings, we have previously deliberated this matter. You were banned due to your conduct towards our staff, and that decision remains unchanged. Brosa's eyes flashed as she shifted her focus to Kames. Do you possess any notion of whom you are addressing? I am acquainted with individuals who could ruin this establishment. Kames's face remained composed, his voice unwavering, ma'am. This establishment upholds respect and equality for both its patrons and its staff. You have transgressed those principles, and that is the reason we shall no longer serve you. Brosa scoffed, crossing her arms defiantly. This concerns safeguarding your little token over here, does it not? She spat, gesturing towards Ethan. You are apprehensive about negative publicity, are you not? Do you believe this little performance will render you heroes? Ethan raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Or perhaps, he said, his voice calm. They are simply fatigued by individuals like you treating others as though they are beneath them. She turned toward him, her eyes blazing. You do not belong in establishments such as this, and you never shall. The sole reason you are here is that they, considering the only thing you bring to places like this is a reminder of why these policies exist in the first place. Kames stepped forward, cutting him before she could respond. MZ Hastings, if you refuse to leave, we'll call security. This is your last chance. Her face flushed with anger, her jaws set in a hard line. Oh, there's no need for concern. I'll be leaving, but don't assume for a moment that this is the end. She cast Ethan one last disdainful glance. You people will never understand, believing you can fit into spaces like this. With that, she pivoted and marched toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, each step radiating anger. Ethan observed her departure, a sense of finality enveloping him. As she faded through the door for the last time, he realized she would not return. Kames turned to him, his expression softening. You all right, Ethan? Ethan nodded, his voice firm. Yeah, I appreciate you standing up for me. Kames offered him an encouraging nod. You manage that well. If she pulls any more stunts, we're all in your corner. The next day, Ethan couldn't shake off the bitterness that lingered from his previous encounter with Brosa Hastings. Her mocking remarks echoed in his thoughts. Each insult was sharper than the previous one, and the more he contemplated, the more he understood that he couldn't merely let it go. Individuals like her moved around unscathed, protected by their privilege and entitlement, believing they could treat others however they wished. But enough was truly enough. Later that evening, as Ethan concluded his shift, Kames approached him with a look of curiosity. "Ethan, I just received an unexpected call," Kames said. "It's from HR at Brosa Hastings Company. They're inquiring if you would come in to provide your account of last week's events." Ethan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Her company actually reached out? Kames nodded. Apparently, someone alerted them, possibly a customer who witnessed the incident. They're looking into her behavior and desire a complete account from you. A wave of satisfaction surged through Ethan. This was an unusual opportunity to hold her accountable. "I'll do it, and if they require evidence, I can even bring the security footage from the restaurant." The next day, Ethan arrived at the consulting firm's office building, a sleek, imposing structure of glass and steel. The receptionist escorted him to a conference room where a woman welcomed him with a firm handshake. "Mr. Collins, thank you for coming in," she said, introducing herself as Pauline Miller, the head of HR. She gestured for him to take a seat. "We've received some troubling reports regarding Ms. Hastings' conduct, and we're here to clarify exactly what transpired." Ethan nodded, appreciating her professionalism. "I'm more than willing to explain. I also have security footage from the restaurant that captures what happened." "Excellent," Pauline replied, her tone measured. "We want to make sure we have all viewpoints. Please know we are dedicated to addressing this matter fairly." Just as Ethan began to elaborate, the door swung open suddenly, and in walked Brosa Hastings herself, her expression darkening the instant she laid eyes on him. She took the seat across from him, casting a smug, hostile look his way. "Oh, you must be joking," she murmured. "So this is what it has come to, dragging me in here over this nonsense." Pauline raised a hand, her tone steady yet assertive. "Ms. Hastings, please bear in mind that this is a professional inquiry. We need you to maintain civility as we move forward." Brosa scoffed, crossing her arms defiantly. "Professional? You're seriously prioritizing him over me." Pauline held her stare unwaveringly. "This investigation is standard procedure, M. Hastings. We're here to collect information from all parties involved." Ethan began to recount the events in detail, starting with her aggressive tone, her condescending remarks, and culminating in the incident when she threw her drink at him. He remained composed, explaining how she had insulted him, her final words still resonating in his. "Mind, you people will never understand, believing you can fit in places like this." Once he finished, Pauline turned to Brosa. "Ms. Hastings, do you have any comments regarding this account?" Brosa's face reddened with anger. "This is absurd. He's twisting everything to portray himself as the victim. The service was slow, and I didn't deserve to be treated rudely just for expecting some respect." Ethan met her gaze firmly. "I was polite and professional until you crossed the line." Pauline glanced at him. "You mentioned security footage?" Ethan retrieved his phone and connected it to a display screen. The footage showcased the entire incident, from Brosa's tense demeanor to the precise moment she hurled her drink at him. As the video played, Pauline's expression became more severe. When it concluded, she turned back to Brosa, her face stern. "Ms. Hastings, this behavior is unacceptable by any measure, especially considering our company values." Brosa's expression contorted, and she shot Ethan a venomous glare. "So what now?" "He's trying to destroy my career because I dared to speak the truth." Pauline remained steadfast. "This isn't merely about expressing your opinion. It's about the consequences of your actions on others. This conduct not only undermines our values, but also casts a negative light on everyone connected to you." In a professional context, Brosa's face turned crimson, her voice escalating. "You're genuinely siding with him over. Do you realize what this could signify for the company?" "Ms. Hastings," Pauline responded with a firm tone, "we have an obligation to maintain a level of respect, integrity, and inclusivity. In light of the seriousness of this incident and the evidence provided, we are suspending you, effective immediately, pending further investigation." Brosa rose abruptly, almost toppling her chair as she directed a shaking finger at Ethan. "You believe you've triumphed, don't you? You think this display of self-righteousness will lead you anywhere. Ethan held her gaze calmly, unfazed by her outburst. I believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their job title. It's a lesson you might need to learn now. Her mouth contorted in anger, but before she could reply, Pauline intervened. Ms. Hastings, you are dismissed. Security will escort you out. Brosa's jaw dropped in disbelief, but after a tense pause, she grabbed her purse and shot Ethan one last look of contempt. People like you have no place here and never will. She spat before storming out, the door slamming behind her. Pauline exhaled, turning to Ethan. Thank you once again for coming in. We will be concluding our investigation soon, but please understand we take such incidents seriously. Ethan rose, shaking her hand firmly. Thank you for taking the time to listen. As he exited the office, a wave of closure washed over him. He had stood up not only for himself, but for anyone who had experienced the treatment he received from Brosa. She had finally faced repercussions for her behavior, and Ethan felt assured he had made the right choice. In the following days after his meeting at the consulting firm, Ethan experienced a revitalized sense of confidence and tranquility. He had confronted Brosa Hastings in her own workplace and presented his case with integrity, at last. Witnessing someone like her face genuine consequences was an empowering experience. Knowing he had the bravery to speak up and be heard, news of the incident circulated among his colleagues at the restaurant, and he sensed their support through small gestures. An extra hand with tables, a sympathetic nod, and the occasional good-for-you man from co-workers who had heard what transpired. The customers also appeared more engaged, some even recounting their own battles against prejudice or quietly thanking him for his courage to speak out. As he continued his shifts, Ethan appreciated the atmosphere of solidarity surrounding him. He recognized how profoundly his actions had impacted others, granting them the courage to. Ethan faced injustices, but remained hopeful for accountability. One evening, as dinner slowed, Kames approached with a smile. Ethan, someone wishes to speak with you, he said, gesturing to the hostess. Ethan was surprised to see Pauline Miller from the consulting firm smiling at him. Miss Miller, he greeted, extending his hand. Please call me Pauline, she replied, shaking his hand firmly. She thanked him and informed him that Ms. Hastings would not return to the company. Ethan felt relieved, appreciating that her actions had consequences. Pauline praised his courage, noting that many would have stayed silent. She mentioned how respected he was at his workplace, which filled him with gratitude. Pauline offered to arrange an interview if he ever wanted a career change. Caught off guard, Ethan thanked her and promised to consider it. As she left, he felt lighter, realizing his stand had created unexpected ripples of change. In the following weeks, Ethan embraced his strengthened sense of purpose and learned that respect must be actively defended. Kames expressed his pride in Ethan one evening as he closed up the restaurant, a trace of pride in his tone. You managed everything with honesty, and now you're a local icon. Ethan chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks, thanks to Kames. I just hope it makes a difference. Maybe it'll help someone else realize they don't have to tolerate people like her. You already have, trust me. Kames, grin now, let's leave this place. It's time to celebrate a job well done. As they wrapped up closing the restaurant, Ethan experienced a revitalized feeling of belonging, not just at work but in the wider world. For the first time, he understood he could confront whatever lies ahead with confidence, and that realization, he acknowledged, was invaluable. A few weeks had gone by since Ethan's last encounter with Brosa Hastings. The restaurant life was running smoothly, and Ethan finally felt a sense of resolution. But on a sunny Saturday afternoon, as he wandered through the city savoring his day off, he suddenly heard a familiar, spiteful voice call out behind him. Well, look who thinks he's free. Brosa sneered. Ethan turned, feeling frustration well up inside him. Brosa Hastings stood just a few feet away, her face distorted with rage. She looked markedly different, her usual polished demeanor replaced with a fatigue and anger that seemed to have etched lines of bitterness into her features. "Didn't expect to see you here, Brosa," he replied coolly, enjoying a leisurely stroll after losing your job. Her face reddened immediately. "You think you're clever, don't you? I'm sure you're just delighted with yourself for ruining people's lives to feel significant." Ethan offered her a dry smile. "I wouldn't say ruining lives is my intention. But if the shoe fits," Brosa's mouth fell open, her eyes flashing with fury. She stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at him. "You little nobody. You think you can just walk away from what you did to me?" Ethan glanced down at her finger, then slowly back up to her face, his expression smug. "What I did to you, you mean revealing you for what you are?" "Yeah, Brosa, I can live with that." Her face turned even deeper red as her hands balled into fists. "I was someone in this city. I had a career, connections, people who respected me until you showed up with your little victim act." Ethan laughed, crossing his arms. "Victim act from my perspective. You're the one playing the victim. You tried, striding all over me, and now you're upset because I didn't let you." Brosa's gaze sharpened and she leaned in, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "Individuals like you don't get to instruct individuals like me on how to act. You should have appreciated merely having a position at a place like that. Instead, you fled to my workplace like a whimpering little informant." Ethan grinned, meeting her fierce gaze unwaveringly. "Individuals like me. You mean those who don't need to purchase respect with a salary. I suppose that's a challenging idea for you to grasp." Her composure shattered, and she shoved him forcefully, catching him by surprise. "You're nothing but an arrogant, spoiled little insect," she hissed, her voice loud enough to attract the attention of onlookers. Ethan steadied himself, but instead of retreating, he moved closer, his tone mocking. "Arrogant from where I stand. It seems you're the one unable to cope. The truth must be tough when you don't get everything handed to you on a silver platter for once." Brosa's fists tightened as her voice rose. "Don't you dare speak to me that way? You miserable little servant. That's all you are, a servant who got too full of himself. You were fortunate to be alongside individuals like me." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, certainly. Lucky to put up with someone who can't go 2 sentences without reminding me of their importance. True privilege." Bystanders began to slow down. Drawn in by the heat of their dispute, some pulled out their phones, recording as Brosa's face grew redder by the moment, her breath heavy with rage. "You ruined my career," she shouted, her voice cracking as she gestured dramatically. "Do you even grasp what you've taken from me? You think you're some kind of hero. All you are is a smug, self-righteous pest who got lucky once." Ethan let out a small, mocking chuckle, crossing his arms while regarding her with a patronizing smirk. "If you had treated people with a bit of decency, Brosa, you'd still have your career. But I guess respect is a foreign notion to you." Her face twisted with fury, and out of the blue, she slapped him hard across the cheek. The sharp sting burned on his face, yet he simply smiled back, feeling a sense of satisfaction from her loss of composure. "Oh, did I strike a nerve?" he said smugly. Poor little Brosa, finally experiencing a dose of her own medicine. Brosa's entire body seemed to quiver with anger, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You have no clue who you're up against. You arrogant little—" "Oh, I believe I know precisely who I'm confronting," Ethan interjected, his tone mocking a spoiled, self-righteous bigot who believes she's superior to everyone else. The crowd around them murmured, clearly taken aback by her actions. A few individuals began to voice their support for Ethan. "We all saw what you did," added a woman, phone in hand, as she filmed. Brosa's eyes darted to the crowd, and a flicker of panic crossed her face before she turned back to Ethan, her voice growing louder and more desperate. "This isn't over people like me. Don't let people like you get away with this. You trash nothing but a low-class, entitled little nobody who thinks he can play with the big leagues." Ethan shrugged, his expression Unbothered, well, this nobody seems to be the one coming out on top. Don't you think? With that final dig, she completely lost control. She lunged at him, shoving him hard in the chest, her nails scratching at. Ethan stepped back, steadying himself as Brosa spat. "You're nothing." He calmly replied, "You're just showing your true colors." Just then, 2 police officers arrived, drawn by the commotion. The taller officer asked, "What's going on here?" Brosa exclaimed, "He's harassing me and ruining my life." Ethan raised his hands casually and explained, "She approached me first and assaulted me." Bystanders confirmed his account, with one showing video evidence. The officer turned to Brosa, demanding, "Did you hit him?" Flustered, she claimed self-defense, but the second officer noted the evidence against her. As the officers prepared to arrest her, Brosa protested, "You can't do this. I'm the victim." However, the gathered crowd had a different story to tell. Led her toward their patrol car, her protest fading as the crowd watched her go. Ethan stood there for a moment, letting out a long, calming breath. A few people approached him, offering pats on the shoulder in supportive words. "Good for you, man. She deserved that." One woman said, giving him a nod of approval, "Can't believe someone would act like that." Another added, shaking his head. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him as he thanked them. Brosa Hastings had finally lost her last shred of control. Her actions laid bare for everyone to see, and as he walked away from the scene, he felt a deep sense of closure. She'd been forced to face the consequences of her actions, and he knew he'd finally put her and her toxic influence behind him. Later that evening, Ethan returned home, shutting the door behind him and letting out a long breath. The events of the day swirled in his mind. Brosa's angry tirade, her venomous insults, the way her self-control unraveled in front of the crowd, and finally her arrest. It had been a whirlwind of emotions, but now, alone in the quiet of his apartment, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He dropped his keys on the table and sank into his couch, leaning back and closing his eyes. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he replayed her final words. Bitter, hateful, but ultimately powerless. He'd face her down, stood his ground, and emerged with his dignity intact. All the years he'd spent swallowing his pride, letting comments slide, keeping his head down in the face of entitlement and prejudice. It was as though all of it had culminated in this one moment, giving him a chance to say enough. As he sat there, he reflected on how much he'd grown from the experience. There was a time when he might have questioned himself, might have let someone like Brosa Hastings make him feel small or inadequate. But now Ethan realized he had transformed into someone stronger. He decided to advocate for himself and others who felt marginalized. He reflected on the support he received from co-workers, his manager Kames, and even strangers who spoke out during the confrontation. It was uplifting to know he wasn't alone in seeking respect and fairness. For too long, he had thought silence was a refuge, but this experience revealed the strength in voicing his truth. As he gazed at the city lights, he felt liberated from the shadow of those who belittled him. The ordeal brought him closure and made him aware that arrogance could be challenged. Instead of anger, he felt pity for those like Brosa, trapped by their own entitlement. Ethan smiled, knowing he had won by simply being true to himself, carrying this newfound confidence into every aspect of his life.